Bonjour la famille, et bienvenue au Grand Prix d'Endurance. Today, the countdown begins to the biggest sports car race in the world. Stay tuned.
Hop in, buckle up, and get ready to lay it on the line. This is Not Speeding, Just Qualifying, a podcast that's just as fast as it sounds.
Hello, family. Welcome to an all-new episode of the Not Speeding, Just Qualifying podcast. I am David Lawrence, and I appreciate you for joining me today. Before I get started, make sure your qualifying setup's all dialed in to go for pole position. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel or search Not Speeding, Just Qualifying in the podcast section of the YouTube Music app to subscribe to us today. Let's get you up to speed, as we always do to start off our shows, with our in-lap segment. For Sector 1, let's head to Spain. Marc Marquez has an affinity for the Motorland Aragon circuit. Since MotoGP began racing there in 2010, Marquez has won a total of 8 races at the track going into this last weekend's action. Marc was in his own zip code all weekend, winning both poles, taking both the sprint and the Grand Prix, beating little brother Alex on both Saturday and Sunday. Marc's teammate Peugeot and on the second factory Ducati rounded out the podium. A weekend off for the MotoGP stars before they cross over to Mugello for the Italian Grand Prix. Sector 2 shines the spotlight on the IMSA Michelin Pilot Challenge as they headlined the IMSA weekend at Mid-Ohio. Sunday's 4-hour race definitely kept you on the edge of your seat. The final hour in particularly, definitely nerve-wracking, with 2 safety cars in the final 40 minutes bunching up the field. Keeping his calm through it all, Francis Seldorf. First, he kept Jeff Westphal at bay before mechanical issues ended his day in the number 39 Carbon Racing BMW. Then he held off a hard-charging Daniel Murat in the number 57 Winwick Mercedes AMG GT4 in the closing moments to take victory for himself and teammate Dylan McIvern, making Turner the 4th different team to win in as many races in GS. In TCR, Brian Herta Autosport continued their domination of the class with a 1-2 finish led by Harry Gottsacker and Mason Filippi taking top honors. Michelin Pilot Challenge is off this weekend before heading to Watkins Glen for a 2-hour race, part of the Watkins Glen 6-hour weekend. Sector 3 closes us today with a trip to Zandvoort for the 3rd weekend of the DTM season. The Saturday 55-minute race for the GT3 Sprint Series was ran in mixed conditions and drama in the pit lane. Multiple stops created some tense and hairy moments. Fortunately, no major incidents. Victory would go to Turkish Porsche factory driver Ayçan Guven driving from Matra Racing over the apt Sportline Lamborghini of Denmark's Nicky team. Sunday's second race of the weekend was much drier but windier. Those were perfect conditions for BMW as the Schubert Motorsport duo of René Rast and Marco Wittmann were uncontested throughout the race, sailing home to a 1-2 finish. The fight for third between the Emil Frey Ferrari of Jack Aitken and the Manthey Porsche of Thomas Prinning would see the Austrian former series champion emerge. DTM resumes their action on the streets of Nuremberg at the famed Nürburgring in July. That completes our in-lap going around the world, recapping the major talking points of motorsports. Our hot lap today is the beginning of our journey to the 93rd running of the Grand Prix of Endurance, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It is well known as the most prestigious sports car race and endurance race in the world. We will get you ready for this year's running of the race, going class by class with contenders and favorites. But before we can preview this year's race, let's look at what's preceded it. The footprints of the 24 Hours of Le Mans can be traced all the way back to 1906 with the formation of the Automobile Club de la Sarthe in the town of Le Mans. The Automobile Club was given the name Sarthe based off the department, a level of French government, in which the town of Le Mans is located in. In collaboration with the Automobile Club de France, the ACS held their first motor racing event on June 26, 1906. The race was held on a 65-mile loop of public road connecting the southwest French villages of Le Mans, Saint-Calais, and La Fête-Bernard. The race was ran over 2 days and was won by Hungarian Ferenc Sis, driving for Renault. This was the first ever race to use the title Grand Prix, its French translation literally coming out to Great Prize. The title given due to the race's high payout of 45,000 French francs to the winner. That equates to about 20.1 million euros or 23 million US dollars in today's money. One other footnote, this race would be the blueprint that would evolve into the Formula One Grand Prix racing we know today. After World War I, Le Mans would again host the French Grand Prix in 1921, but this race would have quite the American taste. Future Indy 500 and national champion Jimmy Murphy would win the race in his American-built Duesenberg. Keep this accomplishment in your memory for later. This 1921 French Grand Prix was held on a 10.7-mile loop south of the town center, much shorter than that 65-mile loop ran some 15 years earlier. After successfully hosting another French Grand Prix, the Automobile Club, now under the title Automobile Club de l'Ouest, simply translated to as Automobile Club of the West, to make the club more regional under the ACF, began fleshing out a new idea. 3 men, Georges Durand, who was the club's chief secretary at the time, Charles Ferrou, an acclaimed magazine editor, and Émile Coquille, a tire manufacturer, came together to propose the idea of a 24-hour automobile race. A 24-hour race wasn't exactly a new idea. The first 24-hour race was held in Ohio in 1907, and the concept was even fleshed out by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Board of Directors in 1910 for their signature event, before the powers decided on the much smaller distance of 500 miles. Nevertheless, the trio marched forth with their plan, with the race set to take place in 1923 on that same 10.7-mile public road loop used for the 1921 French Grand Prix. Now, that's not to say the race was without its stumbling blocks. Ferrou, who would be appointed as race director, the first ever for the 24 hours, in a position he would hold through 1956, did not finish the race's regulations until February, 3 months prior to race day. Despite this little hiccup, 37 entries were submitted. The first race was held on May 26 and 27, 1923. Slightly ironic because the race would be held in June every year after since, with some exceptions of course. The race would take place in some of the most appalling conditions ever. Pouring rain, fresh off a hailstorm, and in heavy wind, all that would combine to make the roads muddy during the night. The race would start at 4 o'clock p.m., another tradition the race would maintain throughout its history to the present day, as drivers would start opposite of their cars, sprint across the track to their vehicles, hop in, crank the vehicles up, and pull away. 33 of the 35 cars that qualified started the race, and despite those horrible conditions I mentioned earlier, 30 of the 33 starters, 91% of the field, finished the 24 hours. To this day, the 1923 Le Mans holds the record for the highest finishing rate in the 92 runnings of the race. Despite the increase in reliability of vehicles today, there is a chance this record will never be broken. For example, if the 2025 race is to break that record, 57 of the 62 cars that start will need to finish. That means only 5 retirements. Good luck with that. Leading home that group of 30 survivors was the all-French team of André Lagache and René Léonard, driving for French manufacturer Chenard Walker, completing 128 laps, 1,372 miles, 2,209 kilometers. Their margin of victory, 4 laps. The irony of this victory is that it would be Zandvoort's only victory in the race. The second running in 1924 would see the first foreign manufacturer, as the British manufacturer Bentley won the race over home makes Zandvoort and Lorraine Dietrich. Bentley would dominate the rest of the 1920s, winning 5 races in the span of 7 years, including 4 in a row. After their 4th straight win in 1930, Bentley left Le Mans and would not return again for 70 years. And if you're not a fan of manufacturers or teams dominating, winning, and consistent streaks, I got bad news for you. Bentley was just the beginning. Granted, Lorraine Dietrich would keep the French on top, winning back-to-back in 25 and 26, but as the 1930s began, a new nation would bring a new period of dominance. Alfa Romeo would become the first Italian brand to win at Le Mans, completing their own 4-peat from 1931 to 34. But oddly enough, all 4 wins were achieved by privately entered Alfa Romeos, despite the factory team's best efforts in 31 and 32. After Alfa Romeo's supremacy, Bugatti and Delahaye would regain supremacy for French automakers in the mid and late 1930s, before the race, as everything else in the world, would be halted for World War II. After a 10-year hiatus, the race returned in 1949. With its return saw the rise of a new force, with Ferrari winning on debut, albeit in privateer hands. With the emergence of the World Sports Car Championship in the 1950s, saw a new British brand at the head of the table, with Jaguar dominating the decade with 5 wins in 7 years, including a 3-peat run from 55 to 57. Despite their dominance, there was plenty of parity, with Talbot, Mercedes-Benz, and Aston Martin all finding Le Mans glory in the decade. But let's get back to those prancing horses from Maranello, because their wins in 54 and 58 were only a taste of things to come. Ferrari would dominate the first half of the 1960s with 6 consecutive wins. By the late 1960s, however, Ferrari would meet their match in the form of an off-track transition, or lack thereof. Rewind with me to 1963, when Henry Ford II approached Enzo Ferrari to purchase his brand to boost the Ford Motor Company's racing profile. Disagreements over control, however, led to the sale not going through, and a rivalry formed which found its way on track. You might have heard of the movie. With Carroll Shelby's help, Ford produced the iconic GT40, which defeated Ferrari at Le Mans 1966 and started a 4-peat for the Blue Oval from 66 to 69. Part of Ford's run at the top, 2 pieces of history. Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt's victory in 1967 saw a car complete 5,000 kilometers over the 24 hours for the first time in race history. That number may be a little bit more commonplace today, but for that era, that number was absolutely astonishing. Equally impressive was the year before, when Chris Amon and Bruce McLaren's winning Ford covered 3,000 miles in the race for the first time. Safe to say, Ford didn't come just to beat Ferrari, but they wanted to make history in doing so. Oh, one last piece of history. That 1966 win was the first for an American-built car in the Le Mans 24 hours, the first American manufacturer to win at Le Mans since Jimmy Murphy and his Duesenberg in that 1921 French Grand Prix we talked about earlier. See, I told you it would come back. But lurking in the shadows of Ford and Ferrari would be the manufacturer that would become the behemoth of Le Mans. First appearing in 1951, Porsche was instantly a class winner in the smaller engine ranks, and the brand would continue to rack up class wins throughout the 50s and 60s. But as the Ford versus Ferrari rivalry was stealing the headlines, Porsche almost came in and spoiled the party, and in fact replaced Ferrari as Ford's biggest competitor, finishing runner-up in 68 and 69 with their 908. But for 1970, Porsche finally seized the day, winning their first Le Mans outright with their famed 917, following it up with victory again in 1971. Porsche finally reached the top, but the French, who hadn't seen a homegrown manufacturer win since Talbot Lago in 1950, were ready to find success in their race again. Enter Matra, who went on to win 3 straight Le Mans from 1972 to 74. The 72 win being of particular importance as Graham Hill, who co-drove the winning Matra with Henri Pescarolo, became the only driver to date to complete the Triple Crown of Motorsport, the Monaco Grand Prix, the Indianapolis 500, and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. A win for British engineer John Wyer's Mirage chassis in 1975 was a bridge to Porsche reclaiming dominance from Matra, as the German Marquis would win 3 of the next 4 after 75 to close the decade. The French would still find glory with Alpine Renault in 1978 and the French-built Rondeau chassis in 1980. But few knew that 1981 would solidify the 80s as the decade of Porsche. Between the open cockpit 936 and the legendary duo of the 956 and 962 under the Group C rules, Porsche would win 7 straight victories at Le Mans, a run of dominance a manufacturer had not seen before or since. Jaguar finally came along to steal Porsche's thunder in 1988, earning their first win in the race in over 3 decades. The same goes for Mercedes, who followed Jaguar to victory in 1989 before Jaguar took the crown back from Mercedes in 1990. Now, we've talked ad nauseum about the Germans, the Brits, the French of course, the Italians, and we've discussed American success. But what about the Japanese? A Datsun 240Z was first entered for the 1972 race, but failed to qualify. The following year, a Mazda-powered Sigma chassis with 2 Japanese pilots became the first Japanese-powered car to race in the 24 hours. It made it to half distance before the transmission broke. Mazda, Nissan, and Toyota would all keep coming throughout the 70s and 80s to see if they could crack through and become the first Japanese manufacturer to win it. Fittingly, though, it was Mazda in 1991 with their 787B that saw the stars align to take an unlikely win, thus becoming the first Japanese manufacturer to win at Le Mans. Iconic Peugeot added their name to the Le Mans Roll of Honor in 1992, and after they scored back-to-back wins with cars built to the ill-fated 3.5-liter World Sports Car formula, Porsche returned and found some, let's just say, unique ways to win. They won with a GT1 road car loophole that allowed Porsche customer Jochen Dauer to modify a pair of 962s for 1994. They won with a prototype in customer hands abandoned by the manufacturer's factory team in 1996 and 97, then finally winning with their prototype GT1 Porsche 911 in 1998. As Porsche found ways to win in the 90s, little did we know 1994 was the beginning of an era of German dominance at Le Mans. Slaloming around Porsche's success in the 90s was BMW, whose engine powered the McLaren F1 GTR to victory in 1995 before building their own car and winning it themselves in 1999. Then, as the calendar turned to the new millennium, came the 2000s, also known as the Decade of Audi. The Four Rings won Le Mans 8 times from 2000 to 2008. With a Bentley win in the middle, the first for the British brand since 1930. If you ignore the asterisk that Bentley was also owned by Audi's parent company, ran Audi engines, the car was ran by Audi staff and was essentially Audi racing in all but name. But with that being said, the actual Audi, the Audi R8, went down as one of the most successful cars in Le Mans history, winning 5 times, and its successor, the diesel-powered R10, winning 3 in a row itself at the end of the decade. The German era of dominance continued into the 2010s as Audi won another 5 straight from 2010 to 14 before our old friends Porsche came back and won 3 in a row themselves. Now that is not to say the Germans didn't have it all their way in the 2000s. Peugeot returned and finally defeated Audi in 2009, the last win by a French manufacturer to this date. Then Toyota returned in 2012 and gave Audi and Porsche headaches until they both left, and then that left Toyota clear to dominate Le Mans from 2018 to 2022, which brings us to the current day as Ferrari have returned and currently hold the crown after winning the last 24 hours. Now, I need to go back and fill some holes here. Since we're talking history, let's also talk innovation, which Le Mans is well known for. First, let's talk brakes. Disc brakes were first used by Jaguar in 1953. Fast forward to the 1980s when anti-lock brake systems, or ABS, became standard place thanks to Group C. We know about Audi's historic first win with diesel in 2006, but alternate fuels have been used and tested at Le Mans ever since the first diesel engine appeared all the way back in 1949. Ethanol was first used at Le Mans in 1980. In terms of engines, Mazda used Le Mans as its platform for the Wankel rotary engine. And this is one example of automakers constantly testing and tuning engines to increase both speed and fuel economy. And Indy and Le Mans go hand in hand in terms of manufacturers putting their aerodynamic prowess to use. For all the innovation involved with Le Mans, there is risk, and unfortunately, as is the case in all auto racing, there is tragedy and death. And I cannot talk about the history of Le Mans without talking about June 11th, 1955. Yes, the day this episode is released is the 70th anniversary of motorsport's darkest hour. At 6:26 p.m., Lance Macklin in his Austin Healey was swerving to avoid the Jaguar of Mike Hawthorne, who was coming in for a pit stop. Macklin then crossed the path of the Mercedes-Benz being piloted by Frenchman Pierre Levy. The collision resulted in Levy's Mercedes going airborne, launching into the main grandstand opposite of the pits. The car continued to tumble, disintegrating, leaving parts and debris throughout the crowd. Despite what had just happened, race officials chose not to stop the race on safety grounds so first responders could get to the dead and injured. Mercedes would retire their fleet of vehicles overnight, and despite having a part to play as well, Jaguar marched on, and it was the Mike Hawthorne Jag, which he shared with Ivor Bueb, that would go on to win the race. Post-race death counts exceeded 80, while an additional 120 plus spectators were injured. Mercedes would end all their motorsports involvement at the end of 1955. They would not return to the sport for another 30 years. Most nations would temporarily ban motorsports on safety grounds, and while most would lift their bans within a year, one notable holdout was Switzerland, which placed a permanent ban on motorsport in the country, a ban that was only lifted in 2022 after being in place for 67 years. Other notable fatalities at Le Mans after Levy include John Wolfe in 1969, Joe Bonnier in 1972, Joe Gartner in 1986, and Alan Simonson in 2013, who still to this day is the last driver to die during the race itself. In total, 22 drivers have lost their lives associated with the 24 hours. 16 of these 22 have occurred during the race itself. I brought up John Wolfe as his 1969 death is significant because his death was a result of him being catapulted from his vehicle due to him not having his seat belts done. This was a direct result of the Le Mans start procedure and tradition that had been in place since the first Le Mans in 1923. But by the end of the 60s, it seemed like competition had taken prominence over safety. The irony of Wolf's death, Jackie Ickx, who was the lead driver in his Ford, didn't run but walked across the front stretch to his car, properly buckled himself in before pulling out, the last on the grid to do so. 24 hours later, Ickx won the first of his 6 Le Mans victories. A staunch opponent of the Le Mans start, Ickx was a driving force in having the race move to a Indianapolis-style rolling start on safety grounds starting in 1970. As we brought up Jackie Ickx, let's also talk drivers briefly, since these vehicles can't drive themselves after all. Ickx held the title Mr. Le Mans as he held the record for the most wins by a driver, a record he held since 1981 when his 5th victory usurped fellow Belgian Olivier Journebien. Ickx would hold the title until 2005 when Denmark's Tom Christensen would surpass him with his 7th win in the race, but more unbelievably his 6th in a row, dating back to 2000, which is still a record today. Christensen will add 2 more wins in 2008 and 2013 before he retired with a total of 9 wins in the race to his name. Plenty are already questioning if anyone will even come close to the mark. The winningest active driver in this year's race is Toyota driver Sebastian Buemi, who sits on 4. All the other drivers around Buemi on that list, Frank Biela, Emanuele Pirro, and Derek Bell, sit at 5. Yannick Dalmas and Henri Pescarolo are equal with Buemi on 4. All of them are retired, and only his Toyota teammates, Kamui Kobayashi and Brendan Hartley, are in close proximity. And if you lost count of manufacturer wins, here you go. Porsche leads the pack with 19, Audi's on 13, and Ferrari is 3rd on the list with 11. Rounding out the top 5, British brands Jaguar and Bentley on 7 and 6 respectively. Ford remains the only American manufacturer to win Le Mans, while 8 different French manufacturers have tasted victory in their home race. Alright everyone, I believe you're all caught up on the history of the Le Mans 24 hours. Stay tuned, as for Thursday and Friday, I will be bringing you class-by-class previews for this year's race as we get you ready for the start on Saturday. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the week here on the podcast. I promise you won't be disappointed. Before we leave on today, just a few simple reminders. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, make sure you're following us on our social media, Blue Sky, X, Instagram, and TikTok. We're all at the handle NSJQ Podcast. Thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you tomorrow for another episode of the Not Speeding, Just Qualifying Podcast. Until then, I'm David Lawrence. Always remember, you're not living life to the fullest until you're going flat out. So long, everyone.